the skull, which we call calvaria, and base of the skull, which is the chair for the brain. Now, base of the skull has two surfaces. Inside of the cranial cavity, you see inner surface of base. Outside of the cranial cavity, you see outer surface of the base. Let's start from outer surface of the base. Now, look everybody here, please. This outer surface of the base, we divide it into three portions. Portion number one, it is located, it is included the place of the palatine, of the bone palatine. If you remember, bone palatine content of two structures. It is the palatine process of maxillary bone and palatine process of horizontal plate of the palatine bone. All the structures which is here, you know, canalis incisivus, it is palatine groove, it is the maxillopalatine groove, it is the greater palatine aperture, it is the lesser palatine aperture, and it is the posterior spine of the nose. From the posterior spine of the nose to behind, you will see two big apertures. These two big apertures, guys, connected oral cavity, nasal cavity with the pharynx. We call them choana. Choana. Write it, please. Which is located in the first part. That's I remember, please. On the outer surface of base of skull, first part occupy the place of location of bony palatine. Let's say two bones we have here. It is maxillary bone and it is the horizontal plate of our palatine bone. Second part, it is located between pterygoid process of sphenoid bone and between greater occipital aperture. That's why it includes inside two structures mainly, my friends. It is the sphenoid bone and it is the clevus of our occipital bone. A lot of apertures we have here. Unfortunately, here something is inserted inside of it, but in any case, let's discuss all of them. This is, my friends, apertures which is located in greater wing of sphenoid bone, foramen ovale, foramen spinosum. Up to it, and not so good visible from inside, it's better visible, there are foramen rotundum. Now, my friends, little below the foramen ovale, you can see foramen lacerum. Foramen lacerum located between three bones, sphenoid bone, petrous part of temporal bone, and occipital bone. This is foramen lacerum. The biggest aperture which we have here in one side, it's broken, I can't show it for you. It is foramen jugulare, the jugular. Jugular vein by this foramen come to outside. Next aperture which is located in front of the condyles, it is canalis hypoglossus. By this canal nervus hypoglossus come to the outside. It is very important structure. You can see deep groove which is located between occipital bone and between the petrous part. We call it petro-occipital groove. Look here, please. We have the same groove and outside and inside. Unfortunately, it's broken, not so good visible, the styloid processes. But remember, please, it is part of the temporal bone. It's located in inferior surface of temporal bone. And just behind of styloid processes, you can see processus foramen stylomastoideum. Great important aperture. By this aperture, nervus facialis come to outside. By the way, foramen ovale, it is place of passage of nervus mandibularis. Foramen rotundum, it is place of passage of nervus maxillaris. Nervus mandibularis and maxillaris, it is branches of nervus trigeminus.
Trigeminal.
First branch of trigeminal nerve, ophthalmic one, pass through the fissura ophthalmica superior and come to the orbit. Let's continue, my friends. Little bit laterally to it, look here, please. You can see the aperture, it is the carotid aperture. By the carotid aperture, you remember canalis caroticus is started, and internal carotid artery by this aperture become to the cranial cavity, and it pass inside of the carotid canal, which is finished on the tip of the petrous bone by inner aperture of the carotid canal. Now, my friends, between these two structures, between the jugular aperture and between carotid aperture, we have fistula petrosa, and inside of it we have canalis petrosus. And this is enough, guys, from Second part, remember please, third part, it is the place of location of foramen accipitalis major and everything which is located behind of it. It is the squamous part of the petrous bone. Here I can remind you the condyles which we have. Behind of the condyles we have fossa condylaris which is passed to canalis condylaris. And we have the foramen occipitalis major which is the main aperture which is connected our vertebra with cranial cavity. This is, guys, outer surface of base of skull. Now more interesting, inner surface of base of skull. In inner surface of base of skull we describe three depressions which we call cerebral fossas. Fossa cerebralis anterior, media and posterior. Let's say we have three parts. Look here please, in the picture we show it by different colors. It is very good visible. Anterior cerebral or cranial fossa, middle cerebral or cranial fossa, posterior. That's like anterior, the yellow here, posterior, middle, red and orange, and posterior it's visible like the, I don't know, brown color. Let's have a look. Anterior cerebral cranial fossa, middle cerebral and posterior. What the borders between them? For anterior cranial fossa, border it is posterior margin of the lesser wing. That's why anterior cranial fossa occupy all the space which is located up to posterior margins of lesser wings. Middle cranial fossa located between posterior margin of lesser wing till the superior margin of the petrous part of the temporal bone. And finally, posterior cranial fossa occupy all the space which is located behind of superior margin of our petrous part of the bone. Let's say, remember this, anterior cranial fossa, middle cranial fossa. What we have in each fossa? Let's start from anterior one. You remember here we have firstly we have the crest of forehead. Crest of forehead upwards continues to the groove of sinus sagittalis superior. We will try to see it here. Let's say frontal crest to the upwards. I don't know how to fold it. You can see the groove of sinus sagittalis superior. This is the frontal crest. Up you can see groove. If you will put your finger, you will see that here we have depression. Here we have protrusion. That's a protrusion. It is crest. Depression, it is the sulcus sinus sagittalis superior. Here it's not visible because the frontal bone is cut. Inferiorly you can see foramen secum. Behind of foramen secum you can see Crista Galli. From two sides of Crista Galli you can see the horizontal plate of ethmoid bone with apertures, which is the apertures for olfactory nerves. Olfactory nerves by this aperture from nasal cavity come to the cranial cavity. You can see the yolks. You can see depressions between the yolks. Behind of yolks and depressions, you can see the lesser wing of sphenoid bone. And you can see the optic groove or chiasmatic groove from two sides of which you can see foramen opticum, which is continued to canalis opticus. By canalis opticus, optic nerve from orbit become to the cranial cavity. Now let's come to the middle cranial fossa or cerebral fossa. Here you can see, first of all, most anteriorly, fissura orbitalis superior. It formed between lesser and greater wings of the sphenoid bone. Little bit behind of it, you see foramen rotundum. Like I say you, it is placed. Don't look in my face, dear. It's here. All my explanation, you look to my face. It's not visible. Here, look. Foramen rotundum. Behind and laterally of it, you see foramen ovale. Behind and laterally, you see foramen spinosum. Foramen spinosum has great meaning. If from rotundum and ovale passes the branches of nervus mandibularis, maxillary one and mandibular one. From spinous aperture come to cranial cavity, middle meningeal artery, which is supply all dura mater of the cranial cavity. Let's continue. You can see the good visible groove, which we call sulcus caroticus. That's a internal carotid artery by internal aperture come to here, and internal aperture it's not so good visible because it's located on the tip, yeah. And here it is exactly come to the groove. In the groove it gives the anterior and middle cerebral arteries, which is supply our brain. Little bit below it you can see foramen lacerum. Foramen Lacerum, it forms between three bones, like I say you before. Yeah, it is occipital bone, it is temporal bone, and it is sphenoid bone. It is place of passage of big diploidic veins. After we will describe it together. Then you see the clevus. In two sides of the clevus, just remember we have fissura of sinus petrosus inferior. Partly it is located on the occipital bone, partly it is located in the inferior or posterior margin of our petrous bone. By superior margin, you remember we have sulcus petrosus superior. Behind of sulcus petrosus inferior, you can see the clevus. Location of the clevus. Here medulla oblongata is located, like my finger. Don't forget that in front of the clevus we have fossa or hypophysalis, yeah, which we call sala turcica. In front of it we have the tuber, behind of it we have the spine, dorsum. Dorsum has posterior clinoid process, lesser wing anterior, and from two sides we have the middle. Let's continue, guys. Behind of the sulcus petrosus inferior, you can see foramen jugulare. It is place of formation of biggest vein of cranial cavity. Here we call it bulb of internal jugular vein. From a bulb of internal jugular vein, started internal jugular vein, by which aperture goes to outside. Little bit up of it, you can see porus acousticus internus. Yeah, you remember by this aperture, nervus facialis come to the petrous part, and after, by foramen stylomastoideum, it is leave the cranial cavity and innervated, mainly impressional muscles, which is located in our face. Don't sleep, dear. A little behind of foramen jugularis, you can see good developed groove, which we call sulcus sigmoideus. It is projected in the posterior margin of the mastoid process. Here we have sigmoid sinus. Sulcus sigmoideus continues again to very deep groove, which we call sulcus sinus transversus, and sulcus sinus transversus finished by eminentia occipitalis or eminentia cruciformis, and here located the confluence of the sinus, the place of connection, and tip of it we call protuberantia occipitalis interna. From protuberantia occipitalis interna, internal crest of occipital bone is started, which goes partly up, partly down. And superiorly, you can see again the groove of superior sagittal sinus. You remember it starts in frontal bone and it is finished in the occipital bone. Behind of the clevus, anteriorly, you can see foramen hypoglossalis, which is continuous to the canalis hypoglossalis. Canalis condylaris is invisible, that's why I can show it now for you. What else interesting I can show now for you here? You can see the grooves for arteria meningia media. It has two branches, anterior and posterior branch, which is supplied the dura mater. You can see groove of the transverse sinus, I show it. Groove of occipital sinus located from two sides of the crest. They don't so good develop. It is sulcus occipitalis. Yeah, inside of it we have occipital sinus.
There is a yoke. There is a yoke.
Yoke, it is protrusion. Groove, it is depression, or we call it the finger lip pressures. Yes. Yeah, this is the pressures. This is the yokes. Yoke, it is protrusions. The same way here, it is the yoke.
Yes.
It is the groove.
Name this groove.
This groove, it is fronto-sphenoid groove. It is divided the frontal bone from the lesser wing of the sphenoid bone. Usually any grooves which we have here, we call by the name of the bones which is attached to each other. Now we come to our orbit, guys. Look attentively here. Like maybe this one, give it will be better visible. No, let's say that one we will use. Look, guys, like I say you, the orbital cavity, it is place of location of the eye. Unfortunately, bones is not divided here to each other. That's I sit down, I will show you the picture. This is the biggest one, is medial wall of the orbit. Now remember, please, superior wall of the orbit contains only two structures. Look attentively to the pictures. 70-75% of superior wall forms by orbital surface of the frontal bone, Another 20-25% forms by lesser wing of sphenoid bone. Let's say if I will try to show, then I say you, it's not visible here. Let's say mainly the roof, it will be our orbital surface of the frontal bone. And from this roof, look here please, I come to the fissura orbitalis superior, and here will be the lesser wing, yeah? Fissura orbitalis superior, it forms between lesser and greater wings of the sphenoid bone. Let's say up to it, I have lesser wing. Below it, I have greater wing. Let's say once again, superiorly in anterior part, we have frontal bone. Superiorly in posterior part, we have lesser wing of sphenoid bone. Again, let's look here. It's great visible in the picture. Let's say once again, superiorly, anteriorly, we have orbital surface of frontal bone. Superiorly, posteriorly, we have lesser wing of sphenoid. Right in that case, it will be easy for you. Let's say right anterior, it is frontal bone, orbital surface. Superior, posterior, it is lesser wing of sphenoid bone. Right, please, inferior wall of maxilla. Laterally to it, this blue-violet bone, it is the zygomatic bone. You can see it forms the lateral part of wall, but now we don't speak about lateral. It forms inferior lateral part, this part. That's why it is located more laterally than maxilla. And this small yellow surface, which you see behind of the maxilla, which is formed inferior posterior part, it is the orbital surface of orbital process of palatine bone. Let's say palatine bone has orbital process. On this orbital process, we have orbital surface, yeah, which is looked to upwards. Let's say remember once again, inferiorly, the main part it is maxilla. Laterally to maxilla, zygomatic bone. Behind of maxilla, orbital surface of palatine bone. Right, please.